Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, May 11th Legislative and Policy Committee meeting. This is our first meeting on Zoom. Our last meeting was back in January when things were a lot calmer. So this meeting is now called to order. The first order of business is approval of meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review them?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh, yes, there's not like a, okay. If you haven't, say yes. I have not. Otherwise, do I have a motion to accept them?
Motion to accept.
Second.
Okay. Okay, our first business for under discussion is 3.01, discussing policy 005, organization. We're talking about this policy because there had been some discussion about the number of committees we have and whether some committees, some standing committees, need to continue or enter in a different phase. I had some discussion about making some of the committees ad hoc committees. So that is kind of the reason for this part. Now, who had a concern about, our number of meetings and committee meetings rather?
I was one of them. So I think some of the discussion had been that we have a personnel committee that is only occasionally, when it's relevant, is extremely relevant, and when it is not, it is not, but it's a mandatory standing committee. And then I think the other was, if I remember correctly, extracurricular and interscholastic.
Yeah.
And then potentially technology and communications has also come up. So I think we had kicked around some ideas, if I'm remembering way back when the last board meeting, that we could have them either be subcommittees, ad hoc committees, that we would maintain potentially a chair designate when it's there, so that we could have somebody who was in charge and a group that would be there, but it didn't need to necessarily be something that is reported on every single board meeting with the whole group. So that was my memory of the discussion, and that's a discussion I think sort of happened across the board terms as well.
Right. And
go ahead.
as we read the way that it's currently written, it does name 8 standing committees, and it says a term of 1 year, but it doesn't say how often they meet. So if our concern is about how often committees meet, then there's no wording in here and probably no need to add wording if we like the flexibility. And as far as making them ad hoc committees, then they would just fall under ad hoc committees may be created, charged, and assigned a fixed termination date. But if we think there's value in having the members determined for a year so we don't have to go through the process of creating an ad hoc committee, we could consider leaving it as is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I think that would make sense for the personnel committee, because that's definitely one that comes and goes, right? The extracurricular and interscholastic committee, however, I would question the need for that. That feels, based on what we were doing in the beginning of it and the committee deciding to even put that up for review with this committee, it just feels we really weren't having anything of meat anymore at this point. I'm not sure that that's a necessary committee.
Yeah, I agree with Lydia on that. And I think there's 2 points to this. It's one, 8 standing committees, it's 32 positions for, 8, 9 people. So it's just filling them across the gap. And then, the question is, in a practical way, do we really treat them as separate committees that meet separately, or do we just do them in committee of the whole? So do we just combine those ideas under larger committees, so we're not who's on. I mean, look, we're all here. It's policy committee, and we all kind of have a practice of chiming in on anything that's interesting, which I think is a really good thing. I don't know that it needs to be fixed, but I'm for the, if we can have one meeting where we just put it on the agenda, it
I
kind of
don't know.
makes.
I think I was not suggesting that, just to be clear. And I know I'm not on the policy committee, but just to share, I know when we talked about this before, we had talked about making sure that we weren't, I'll be honest, the only reason I'm here is because it's Zoom. Because normally with my work schedule, I probably wouldn't be able to make every committee meeting that I'm not a member of. But because it's a Zoom meeting, I can. So I'm here, and that way I'm not the only board member who's not engaging in this dialogue and hearing the dialogue and then being behind where everybody else has heard it for when things go to the board for approval. But I would say if we get into a regular cadence again and our new normal gets going, I'm not sure that it's the best use of all of our time. Why then bother having committees? And then we should all just talk about all this stuff all the time. So for me, it would either be, let's get the committees we need, and then the individuals that are responsible for those deliberate. We trust those individuals. They bring it to the board passes what we need to pass or doesn't pass what we don't want to pass. But then for those that are not necessary, that's why conversation came to this. Because for the extracurricular and interscholastic committee, a lot of the things that were on that are what are the responsibilities of the individuals that were our liaisons in their day-to-day and reporting up through to their administration, not necessarily board oversight, in my opinion. But I could be wrong, and I'd be open to that. But for that one, I don't believe there's a committee necessary or should be.
Sorry to jump in. I know this isn't my committee anymore, but the other discussion was combining committees. So combining something like buildings and grounds with finance where it makes sense, and possibly people services with curriculum, because it basically is special education. I don't know what the appetite is for that.
I don't know. I think from my standpoint as a newer board member and knowing there's 6 of us, I don't really understand what the difference is between an ad hoc committee and already having the committee structure established where we already have people on it. I guess if we go 2 years and you say the tech committee's never met, right, then maybe you look at it and say, so what was the purpose of having them? But when I look at some of the things we discussed, including website, streaming, what we're doing now with virtual meetings, for example, when we look at personnel committee, obviously, administration is heavy into contract negotiations, but even as I read this policy and I see, establishes and reviews evaluation systems for school department staff and superintendent, I don't think any of us saw this coronavirus coming, and I don't know what that means for evaluation systems down the line. So I guess my perspective is, if we're not mandated to meet once a month where there's 8 committees with 4 of us on all the committees, I don't think it's been an overwhelming burden as it's been so far. So, and I don't really know what all the committees do anyway. So for me, it's kind of a trial run.
Can I jump in a moment? Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Melissa.
Yep.
I'm not on the committee, but having been through this, I think we do have an inordinate number of committees, but there are some, I think, that we can just say we meet as needed instead of breaking it down into an ad hoc, because then it can either fall apart. But if the committee is there, just we meet as needed and we just make a quick report. That's just, I do think we have too many committees at the moment. It did make it hard to populate the committees appropriately, but just to say as needed to me is sufficient for having too many meetings. But it does give the opportunity, if there is need, such as personnel, which will be when evaluations occur, when situations occur, it's there and the structure is there. Even though you don't have to meet all the time, the structure would be retained, and just say committee as needed. Now the others that might be combined, that's up to you guys, because it did kind of explode very quickly. That's just what, I would like to keep some structure for some committees and just meet as needed and report as needed.
Yeah, when I was looking at other school districts, other school boards, we have 8 standing committees, and the average for the school boards around us are 5.2.
Right.
And most of them do combine some of these committees. The trouble with just having a committee which doesn't meet is you may get on 1 or 2 which don't meet, and therefore you're not doing any work. Versus if you're
That's
on
an
2.
option.
Does anybody feel like they're not doing work? Scary.
Oh, I would wish.
Motion
Wouldn't I?
denied.
Call for a
That'd
meeting.
be nice.
Well, so also as a reminder, 2 of those didn't exist until I think last year or the year
Right.
before. Curriculum and instruction and technology were, I think, arguably just created to create leadership positions. So that it's not like those are traditional long-term committees that have been part of the structure. So I just want to remind everybody of that.
Which 2 were that again?
It was technology and communications and curriculum and I'm sorry, extracurricular.
Extracurricular, yeah.
Yeah. In the past, technology has been divided into two arenas, one of which was facilities because of the networking, et cetera. And the other half of it was involved in curriculum.
Curriculum, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it just kind of created, to me, that's fine. I think it should stay where it was, because those are the kind of the 2 elements that really, one spends the money, one coordinates where it's spent and how it's spent.
So which of those would our current approach with Zoom meetings and that whole discussion that we had to have around Zoom and how it works, which of those committees do you think that would have fallen in? We didn't actually
Well-
have a meeting over it, but I did have
Correct,
a conversation with
correct, yeah.
Paul because I was a committee head. So
So
Yeah,
I
we
think
do have
that,
tech people. We have a lot of tech people who do that, who are within the administration, and they would be dealing with that. If that committee hadn't been created, they would be doing it as we sit right now. And it's a whole new world out there. I don't disagree with that. It's
Yeah,
totally new.
I come at it from a little bit different. I mean, I understand Lydia's point earlier about, the meetings when we get back to the cycle, but that's almost why I think having combined committees sort of makes sense, because it's easy to meet on Zoom and participate, right, in this meeting tonight, where if we break into too many committees and we're trying to stay up to date, in a world where we have to meet physically, and we start meeting 8 different committees, it could lead to a lot of meetings. And I guess that's what would be my concern when we get back to normal life is, do we now miss the opportunity, like Lydia, if you were traveling your work, or John, I know you travel, if you want to join via Zoom. I like this meeting format, so it's a different story, but it also, the more meetings potential that happen, and the more we sort of narrowly define the committees in terms of scope, then what do we discuss? And when does finance cross with buildings and ground? When does technology cross with curriculum? And it just kind of feels a little much for what we have. And that's why I was, if we had 5 committees or 6 committees versus 8, it just kind of feels like, it's one less thing, especially as we if we ever return to normal life.
Well, I think that's what committee of the whole was. And I hate to jump on John's prerogative here, but I am noticing we're spending 18 minutes on, it's a pretty straightforward.
Spending more time than we spend meeting on these.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether or not we might actually encourage that if people have notes of how they think it could be restructured, we just get together and at some point, either a future meeting or a committee of the whole or whichever one of these might actually be the appropriate committee to talk about it. Just pick a menu of we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and see if we can get the ideas.
Could quickly offer, though, the whole reason this was even being discussed today is because those 2 committees, the extracurricular and interscholastic committee and the personnel committee, made the recommendation to this committee to consider making them an as-needed committees. Or extracurricular and interscholastic, I don't believe is needed, but the personnel should be as needed, because 90% of the time that committee is being discussed in executive session anyway.
Right.
So that's more of an as needed thing. Like the evaluations are coming up, and John, you'll get an email from me shortly about that because I'm the chair. But we're not having a meeting about it. It's not a
right. When you say ad hoc has no designated
not ad hoc,
chairperson.
as needed.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And as I read this, they're all as needed.
Yes,
I'd
but
argue
what I'm
extracurricular
also saying is
never needed.
extracurricular interscholastic committee is not necessary as a committee. That committee had a conversation, we put it to the board and to this committee to say, we do not believe that that committee is a necessary committee. So that's something for you guys to consider, this committee to consider. I'm not on this committee, but the personnel committee, I do believe is as needed. So
Okay,
that's it, and we can stop.
I agree with
discussion if you wanna
that,
do
John. I'd say, why don't we make a motion to consider just eliminating that committee, and then anything to Carl's point, we can just, anything further beyond that.
We
But
just
let's-
modify it next time.
Yeah. So I would say step one, let's eliminate that one.
Well, make a motion.
I make a motion to do what Lydia said. Let's eliminate the extracurricular
Go, Lydia.
portion.
So that was section 3, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, number 3 in
Number
the list
3.
of committees.
Yes, eliminate that one.
So we
Yeah.
just eliminate that and adjust the numbering for the rest of them and end up with 7 total.
For now.
For now. Yeah.
For now.
We can also discuss combining them again. And for those people on the committee, why don't you send me your thoughts about if you want to keep things the same, if you want to do combinations, and which combinations you think would work.
John, did you get a second?
No.
Second.
I thought Jennifer was. Okay, all those. Okay, that's good, right?
There
Good,
you go.
good. Okay, 3.02, policy 006. Let me see.
See what happens when uninvited committee members come to your committee meeting?
I know. Can we have a policy for having you guys stay home once in a while?
It's hard to say to a committee that votes itself out of existence that you have to stay in
Yeah.
committee. So what are you gonna do?
It's not just the committee, the liaisons agreed as well. It just wasn't a good use of time. Anyway, sorry, thank you.
Okay, the next item, policy 006, I think the main part of discussion was people's concerns about how we stimulate and regulate public comments. Is that correct? Richard, is that correct?
Yes, that was correct. Then also with that policy, there are some additions in section 5 recommended by PSBA. So that was sort of added a few weeks ago.
And also, this one has been under discussion because it doesn't align with what the legal mandates are, and it doesn't align internally with how we actually operate. So I had a question, the yellow public participation highlighted section, is that existing under special meetings? And the next section is public participation on page 3 of 10.
That was there, correct?
It just highlight is the point of conversation.
Okay. So my understanding is Fox Rothschild suggested that we change shall to may, because we are not obligated under law and committee meetings to have public discussion the way we are in a regular board meeting where we have to take public comment. And by doing that, we are subjecting ourselves to a mandate that the state doesn't require. So the suggestion had been, by changing shall to may, we may still do it. We're not prohibiting it, and we can keep up with our practice of allowing it, but we are not bound. And it's also incredibly broad. So how much of it do we need to provide, et cetera, would change that.
So we can change that to may if you'd like. And that is correct. The legal guidelines suggest that at public meetings in which there's deliberation and voting, the community should have a chance to say something before that occurs on the agenda. So although this language is applied to the committee meetings too in various ways. So we can change that to may to have that option.
Well, I guess the only thing we want to clarify is at our voting governance meeting, we must have it. For committee meetings, we may have it. So anything short of our formal board meeting once a month is not actually required, I believe our solicitor. So we might want to just, prior to each, whatever we officially call our general board meeting, it shall be provided committee meetings, it may be provided. So just adding that extra sentence clarifies that those are two different things.
Yep, we can add that language.
And then the only other place that I had noticed something is when you go under work sessions, we have not actually complied with this, which is when we talk about committee of the whole on page 7 of 10, we have the same procedures apply to a regularly scheduled board meeting shall also apply to committee of the whole meeting, but we do not present colors. We do not, say the flag, pledge the flag. We don't do any of that. And my understanding from the solicitor is because that is a work session and a committee meeting, not a legislative meeting or a business meeting, that isn't required, and we're not doing it. So simply, if we change that to it operates as a committee meeting, is actually what we do in that. It's just it's multiple committees functioning at once. So I would suggest that we strike that the same procedures apply and modify that language in some way that reflects what we actually do, which is treated as a big committee.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll revise that and then bring it back up to the next meeting. Good.
And now put us in compliance. We would be compliant with the law, but we also would be behaving as we should, because we're not, none of us did the stuff we're supposed to do.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. That was my concern on that one.
So be it. Okay, next. So we're going to change that, right, Rich? Dr.
Yep.
Mark? Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
two edits.
Okay. 3.03, policy 008.1. This was only a change in date from 2018 to 19 to 2019 to 20. So it's just a formality that we just get a motion to change the date. Motion?
Motion to change?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm motioning.
Paul, second.
Second.
3.04, policy 701.1, naming of school district facilities and the following regulation. Dr. Martini, I was a little unclear what the exact issue was.
From a few months ago, I believe Mrs. Booth had asked to have this on the agenda to discuss.
Mrs. Booth?
Yes. Yes. I did speak with Jennifer earlier today. It kind of has a little history, and some of it has to do with tradition, restricting the desire to restrict any rooms within the high school named after anybody other than Owen J. Roberts. And it's been a, I don't know if you want to call it tradition. I don't think it's a bad one, because I personally feel these facilities belong to the taxpayers. But it involves some other issues that have to do with if you're going to do that, how you do it, how the committees are created, and what criteria is to be answered to. And there were some concerns over some of what has been going on. So I did raise the issue, and I would like to see some kind of clear definition of what we do and do not allow for the naming of rooms within our facilities. As I said initially, it was begun in the high school, and maybe it should be broad-based, and just restrict naming any room within the community taxpayer-owned facilities. That's up to everybody. That's just my opinion, but there was a flag raised on some of the criteria that has been very pertinent and concerning, that anybody who is considered is of the utmost character. And I don't want to get any deeper than that, but I would like people to really look at that regulation and maybe just make it clear cut so these issues don't arise. please jump in. I know I did raise the issue, and just let me know how you feel. I did raise the issue.
Yeah, so my question when I was speaking with Melissa earlier, and I'm going to repeat it publicly, was do we have any rooms other than the O&J Roberts room in the high school that are currently named after individuals in any of our schools?
My understanding is no, that has not occurred. Whether it has become a casual naming that went kind of under the radar, but no, there are no other rooms named after any individuals. We have hundreds of excellent, academically achieving educators who have gone through that school and affected many, many, many students. So to single out one for any particular reason, as I said, it's just my opinion. It belongs to the taxpayer, and it should stay that way, but it is O&J Roberts. And as far as I know, there are no other rooms that have ever been named after an individual who has been an employee of the school district.
This came up during when we had an ad hoc naming committee meeting, and one of the, allergies. One of the things that came up was the Pandora's box of educators naming art rooms after every art teacher and physics labs after every physics teacher that's been there over 25 years. It was more of there was that question, like, should we, putting it to this committee, should there be any kind of limitation on either whether it be a room within the building and or the room according to educators. And then the other part was clarity around, I believe, but I don't know, I'm trying to look at the policy really quick, about who has submitted past, like who has submitted the request. I think that was the other question on the table for the policy.
Yes, well stated, Lydia. Yes, you did hit a couple points. I wasn't intending to speak, but and now that I got involved, yes, that is one of them. One of the reasons. I know we went to outside facility, but it was a large community group, so that there's been that variation as to whether there's been a community request or whether it was a personal request. To me, it's just easier to make it clear cut and retain some clarity in a simplified manner. Up to you guys, but.
Well, and I'd say some consistency, because there's nothing other than theoretical tradition that says a stadium can be named, but a library can't, and it's not in here when you read it.
Correct.
There's actually, it's very broad. It just says a request. There's nothing specific in this. Clearly, there was an intent written here that if somebody comes and wants to give us $500 million building after them, out of the generosity of their heart, since they're not allowed to ask for it to be named in their place. And we don't want to tie our hands, but if we, it is reasonable to think, because I immediately thought it in one case, is there are several, very important late teachers who deserve to be on things. And, if we start handing them out, I'm going to start making some requests myself, because I had two very important art teachers who deserve to be on those art rooms if we do it. I don't know how we cut the baby in half of getting rid of everything and not permitting anything and taking it case by case. And then not giving it to somebody. Does it seem like somehow they've done something when there's just not a stomach for naming a room, as opposed to the person not being theoretically deserving of it?
We did make alternate suggestions that if somebody wanted to make an honorarium, you could, I'm trying to think of exactly what we suggested. You could make a little scholarship, or you could buy donate a particular item that could be utilized for an honorarium of those who have done some great things. I don't disagree with that. It was just actually naming a facility. But I mean, that's for the board to clarify, and that's just my opinion, but I would like it to be clarified a little more.
I don't understand. Did anyone actually make a petition, or are we just debating this?
Yes, there's an existing. And Is this also simply changing the policy to shirk our, if we all simply feel that there should be an incredibly high bar, like let's say one of our
Yeah.
kids is, killed in action and gets the Medal of Honor, that would seem absurd to not name something for them. But that is honestly of a different level than, I don't want to say merely, but 25 years of service is something many, 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 many people.
Right. Right.
Is it appropriate for us simply to make the hard decisions and occasionally say, that's a suggestion, but no?
Yeah, as I listen to this,
Policy.
Carl and Melissa, it feels like we're a solution in search of a problem a little bit, unless there's a specific thing that I'm not sort of aware of. But you have a board who can vote, and you're talking about clarifying, and I'm fine if we want to say what's the criteria that they should be, not existing teachers, retire, whatever. I don't know what but I guess I'm not following what the actual issue is that we're trying to fix.
I move we don't change the policy and move on.
Yeah.
And we just, if there is one on the table, the process is there and it gets brought to the board and the board can decide, that's.
Well, isn't there supposed to be a naming advisory committee that formed?
Correct. Yes.
So, that's their job, right? To say,
Not to change the policy.
oh yeah, but to give a name.
Yes.
But did they meet and have a problem that they're at? Is there a request to change a specific piece of
That's
this
my
policy
question.
from the naming? I'm just not hearing a specific request.
There was a request.
There is a request that's been on the
Look at it.
Part of it was this concern about inconsistency of policy. It requires a supermajority to name something. 6 out of 9.
It wasn't about that individual issue or the naming committee that just took place. It was about during that process, there were some questions about naming a room within the building after a previous educator. So that's why it went to the committee.
Exactly.
So the question is, should we, the question that was posed, and Melissa, I believe you brought this, so let me know if I'm wording it correctly,
I did.
was that we have not allowed naming of rooms for prior educators before, up until now. And this one, the naming committee that was coming forth would have done that if it was
Correct.
approved. So is that something that we're open to or not? And should it be a policy matter? Or are we saying, no, it's not a policy matter. We can name every room in the school if we want to, but we just have to make the decisions yes or no. It's just that it's a point in time. It's an inflection point where it's like, if we say yes now, it will open everything up. If we say no now, then is this a policy matter or not?
Agreed. You stated that well, Lydia. It's Pandora's box. How many educators had we had go through here?
But then
And that's where it comes to.
I'm not sure what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't know that it's.
I don't know what.
I move we don't change the policy, move on.
Yep. John made a motion.
I was second.
Okay, then
Yeah.
policy is tabled and no changes required. All right, moving on to something easier, I hope. Oh, no, not at all.
No.
Oh, if you can find something easier than that, John, you're worth your weight in gold.
Policy 707, use of school facilities. I think this gets back to the 51 percentile of student participation. Is that correct? That's what our major issue is. We still don't have a definition for who gets in these certain categories.
And who monitors it? And is that as they're rostered or participate, and who monitors that? I remember looking at Jackie and saying, "You're going to do this?" And she kind of said, "Yeah." Then we had the conversation about if we want to make our school facilities more widely available, why don't we just lower the fee schedule? To which Jackie replied, "But we don't want to make our facilities more widely available." So I left January 27th totally confused over what we're trying to do.
I think we should ask Ms. Crumrine what she feels is as the administrator of this. if you could articulate the problem and if you had any solution, if you think there needs to be one, I'd be interested in hearing from you.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment. Sometimes we often have folks outside of the school district that want to use our facilities, and the way that we had, or maybe even that are double, have an organization that has OJR students and non-OJR students. So many years ago, we had this in place where we would verify the roster, but as we grew, it just became more difficult to do that, to verify rosters. So the board did then at that time take that out of the policy. So I'm not recommending that we have something that's unwieldy to manage from that standpoint. Our facilities are in great demand. They're in great demand. So that many other changes to this policy are in there and are worth changing. I'm not sure if the markups are in here or not. I was just going to look for that.
Yeah, the ones that say draft seem to have the markups. So you're referring to the section that has Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D. And
Right.
currently in the marked up version, the words primarily serving the OJRSD community, parentheses, minimum 51% participants are OJRSD residents, in parentheses. That is in green, which I think means it's a new addition.
There we are, correct. And I think this really, to be in all honesty, I think this was brought up by Dr. Lloyd, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember, by the board prior to election and change of board members. So this is one of these things that's kind of
Carryover.
the carryover, right?
So Leslie, do you have an opinion on this?
There was a specific case, and so I think this came up because we had a very good group that largely or majority served O&J students that wanted to use an elementary school, but their mailing address, because they served two different districts, was over the line. And as a result, they had a very high bar for payment. There was discussion of, were we able to simply waive it, which we are as a board if we simply chose to. I almost think this falls into the line of the naming thing, where sometimes we just have to say this group qualifies and we're just going to say 9 of us say yes. Or should we then figure out what the deal was, because they could simply change the post office box and all of a sudden they're in our district and it's exactly the same group. So I think that's how this came up originally, but then boy, there's a whole lot of extra stuff that got put in.
So if we said any charitable or nonprofit organization serving the O&J Roberts School District and didn't define what serving means and didn't have location in there, would that fix it or make it a bigger mess?
Makes it a bigger mess.
Yeah.
Opens Pandora's box.
We're doing that so much.
To our last conversation.
Jackie, is it something you could just bring to the board to waive as needed? I mean, how often does this happen? Again, I'm kind of are we trying to globally fix an exception issue that we could just manage by exception?
I guess the
Or
board,
are you readying a parade of organizations to show up at every board meeting to petition you for admittance?
that's a possibility. At the time that this occurred, we had another out of district organization that was already had a lot of OJR kids on it and had a lot of Montgomery County students on it as well, and they were paying the higher fees. So that became the issue at the time. I mean, the board can always consider a waiver.
Yeah.
Always consider a waiver. I would just be very careful about implementing something that is extremely difficult to police. That's my concern about this format.
Okay, so
we don't change this. I'm at a
located within is acceptable, or located within is not acceptable?
Can you refer to the page you're on?
I'm looking at page 5 of 6 in, what is this? 700 property, 707A regulation.
Okay.
And it's the section that says Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D, because I thought that was.
And that is all the way that it currently operates. So the green is anything that was added. So at this point in time, I would recommend that we don't add that, because that is the piece that requires us to verify that 51% of the residents participating in that group actually live within the district. And there's just a ton of facility use going on.
So located within, you could administer that, but if somebody made a convincing argument of our PO box is outside your district, but we have a lot of students in your district, then you would bring it to the board and.
Should it maybe be and or
Authorized?
primarily serving the OJR school district community, but don't put the minimum 51%? Because that's really what's.
I think you run the potential of just exploding the use of facilities, which, as I understand it, is not what we're hoping happens. And the other side of it is, if you grant waivers here and there, how do you justify one organization versus another because you like them or because your kid is playing on that team or whatever? That's a very difficult position to put yourself in.
Unless it serves a particular need. And in this case,
Because you're saying, I don't understand how, I'm saying take out the minimum 51 participants, but leave the serving the OJR school district community.
Right, we could say, well, even if you use the word primarily.
All right, well then take that out too.
Yeah.
It does happen often. I mean, the mountain bike team, the mailing address is right outside our school district only because we couldn't get a mailing address with the school and we had to use a friend of the organization's office. It's just what our legal address is. But every single student on that team lives and goes to O&J Roberts. But the mailing address of the organization is Phoenixville. So it's just a legal mailing address. It's not
Right.
It doesn't reflect the organization itself.
This would be for use of the school district facilities, right?
Right. But I'm saying if I would submit a request under that guideline, I would be denied for the organization. I was submitting it for the organization. The organization would be denied because the mailing address is Phoenixville. Yet 100% of the kids in that organization are O&J Roberts kids.
Then that to me would be something that the board would definitely waive because.
Right. So, but I'm hearing you guys say that that's happening relatively, like, is that happening relatively frequently, that we're having this mixture of things like that and we want to allow them to use it, or no? And it's like, let's just keep it if it's located in O&J Roberts and then we just bring exceptions to the board.
How big a problem is it?
Yeah, that's really my question, is how often is this happening?
It'll happen every season because
Once.
we have large, we have travel teams that are looking for facilities. And we always want to make sure that our kids can use our facilities first.
Well, there's the issue too of whether they're an actual nonprofit or
Right.
for profit and things like that. So that's in there. I mean, again, I always lean to, we should just make a decision based on what's in front of us and not constantly craft the policies around.
Agreed.
All right. So are we in agreement to accept the changes as is?
Accept the changes as is?
No,
I thought we were
I disagree with
accepting
that, no.
everything except for in the definitions under class A, B, C, and D, we will not add the stuff in green.
Correct.
That was our,
Okay.
so shall I make a motion for it?
Hang on a second. One thing I did notice is on page of the, of the 707 policy on page, where is it? The third page, 205, medical marijuana products as prohibited by federal law. If we have students that are participating and they have a prescription, I have a feeling we're going to get sued and should, because they have a doctor's prescription in Pennsylvania where medical marijuana is legal. I'd be interested in getting the lawyers to take a look at that to make sure that we're not actually infringing upon participant rights under Pennsylvania state law by trying to protect ourselves from federal law.
We can do that.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're going to table this and revise it again and bring it back next meeting?
If that's the only other thing, we can
Can we accept the changes? So it's not
accept it
always-
as with the review, with Brian getting back to us on the legality and his recommendation, and then still move it forward for the meeting. Is that correct?
Okay.
I'm
Motion.
unclear what we're moving forward here. So what are we specifically excluding and including of these changes? 'Cause I'm
So what I have in my notes is that we're taking out the green text based on the 51%,
Yes.
and that we're going to get a legal opinion on the state law versus federal law and have the attorney write up a sentence for that. And then we would move those that edit it to forward.
Rich, you're also removing the primarily serving, not just the 51%.
Primarily serving. Got it.
The green.
Yeah, those actually appear in more places also now that I'm looking through. So in 707, page 1, page 2. So you'll have to, I guess, search on that 51%.
We will. It's throughout 707 and 707A.
Yeah.
But we can
Yep.
make those changes if the board is comfortable, and then have the legal opinion on the other item. And then turn it back to L&P and they can review and make sure they're comfortable, and then we can move it.
All right. We'll see it next time. Okay. Moving on next to the draft for number 916, volunteerism, I guess. Dr. Marchini, what were the major, I only see like changes in name and adding activities director. Is there anything of meat here that we're changing?
I think there was members of the committee, Mr. Deal, I believe, asked if we could add this on as a discussion item. And I think it had in regards to the language related to politics or political campaigns, and talking about that as a volunteer. Mr. Deal?
Yeah, no, I was more concerned about the visitor policy because I didn't know how the volunteer policy related to it. So I don't know that I have any specific concerns about this policy. I'd have to review it in more detail. My question was more about the visitor policy that we had discussed on January 27th, but I don't recall having reviewed the volunteer policy on January 27th.
No, I apologize.
No
There was
problem.
907 that we were talking about on that one.
907 visitors.
Right.
And the draft does have just some language corrections as well. Like the coaches / advisors at adjustment, it was all athletics directed.
Yeah. Yeah, there was some language recommended for changes for that too.
Yeah, I'm okay with the changes in language. I guess if I had further concerns about it, I would bring it to Mr. Melnizek to put back on the agenda for future review.
Okay, in that case, do we have a motion to accept the changes?
Motion to accept the changes for volunteers.
Yes.
Second.
Okay. All right. Policy review, new policies and or requested changes. So again, these are name changes in most cases. These policies used to talk about guidance counselors, I guess. Which way are we going, Dr. Marchini?
We prefer the title to be school counselors.
Okay. So this is just changing all the guidance counseling verbiage to school counselors, correct?
Yeah, these were, upon review of all the policies, this is where we found guidance counselor would be changed to school counseling. I do expect that at the next L&P meeting, I'll find a few more here and there. I keep finding them. But these are the main ones that we saw that we wanted to change the name. And in this section, we do have 907 on here, school visitors, based on some revisions, discussions. The last one, that does not include, the 907 policy is the exception to the name change. But all the others just have to do with changing the school counseling name.
Okay. Well, I would suggest we we passed policy 112, 146, and 819 as regards to those name changes. I think, given the amount of emails and concern from the community about our recent interaction with the police, we need to look at policy 219 and policy 824 in more detail besides just changing the name. So I would suggest we table discussion on policy 219 and 824 until we have another L&P meeting where we can talk about them strictly in detail.
Since we don't have one coming up for a while, would we have any objections to actually scheduling one next month that's focused just on this and all of the sort of interconnected policies that go with it?
I have nowhere to go.
Nor do I.
So I
Yep.
like that idea.
Yeah, I'll look at the calendar and I'll let you know, John, dates for June.
Okay. So can we pass the motion to pass 112, 146, and 819?
Motion to pass 112, 146, and 819.
With the changes for,
With
school
changes
council.
for, yes, guidance to school.
That's step one. A second?
Second.
Okay, now going to the school visitors, policy 2907. What were the changes that we were going to agree upon there under guidelines, I think?
Yeah, I have an issue there. So one of the things that really concerns me in this policy is on the page 2 of 2, under enumerated number 2, just under that. No visitor may confer with a student in school without the approval of the principal. I think I understand the intent of it. What I get concerned about is I'm there to visit my child and 3 of my children's friends run up and start talking to me. Am I literally in violation of this policy in any way?
Yeah, I think, John, I'm 100% concerned with the same language. This is way too broad, and I violate this every time I've gone to school if someone I've coached or ran into says hi and I talk to. And I think it's just ripe for selective enforcement. And I think we don't want that. So to the extent that this could create that situation of selective enforcement, maybe we could change this language to more, and I get the intent of it, and I agree with the intent. I just think we need to maybe fix that language better.
The other thing I have a concern with is, and I don't know, and maybe Rich, you can help point me in the right direction, whether it's this policy or maybe it is back to the volunteer policy, but understand that there may be reason immediately to suspend a visitor from entering a campus. Certainly school safety is a primary concern. Is there a period of time, though, that it should require some kind of review by someone other than a building principal, a superintendent, whether that's a committee of the board? I mean, in some cases, we could be talking about banning a taxpayer for life upon entry to the school for whatever reason. And although I agree that someone in authority needs to be given the ability to suspend that privilege immediately if there's a perceived risk to the student body, when we're talking about the passage of time, is there any such review process, or can that go on indefinitely? Is there any check or balance on that system?
We would have to take a look at some other policies locally, using the board docs database to see what other schools are doing. I'm not sure I have the answer to what's recommended, but it does make sense. We could add, we could put some drafts together for the June meeting, since we're going to be meeting in June, and revisit this with some different language that would put some protocols in place for your review.
Yeah, Rich, I would support that as well. To follow what John Deal said is whether it's an appeal process that after, somebody could come back and have a recourse of some sort to this to go to the board. I think there needs something in here, from the past experience that we've seen on this issue.
Is our general complaint process, though, the means by which somebody does that? I mean, we have a form people can fill out when they feel like they are dissatisfied with an outcome, and it is theoretically supposed to get run up the ladder. Is simply referencing that adequate as opposed to establishing a whole new regime of review?
I guess if you could tell me what the ladder is, maybe the ladder exists and I just don't understand it.
Well, I think on that I agree. I think that's one that's a little buried in our policies. So maybe in light of some other situations, that's a discussion on how we bring that to light, that people who feel they're not being well served have an opportunity to register that and make it be very clear. Could we dig into that as part of this process and see whether it's as clear as, whether I'm thinking it's as clear as it should be?
I'd support that. I
As it should be?
think it'd be healthy to take a look at it, just understand the process.
So in the school visitors, having some sort of protocol that would refer to the complaint policy as a way of appeal, and then with the L&P committee looking at the complaint policy for next meeting.
Right.
Does that sound right? Okay.
I think that's fair.
And that would cover a whole host of things. Anybody who had a complaint about anything could be directed to one place with one policy that everybody was clear on, and it wouldn't be all of these sort of ad hoc versions of things based on whether it's a this or that. There is a clear means of reporting.
Yep. We can add those two with some other samples that I can come up with, and then I'll also have the complaint policy on there. No problem.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, good. Moving on to 5.
Can I just clarify with the no visitor may confer with a student in school without the approval of the principal? Are we suggesting that that be stricken completely or modified?
I was suggesting a modification to that. I just read that as an impossibility.
Right. So do we want to try to provide some direction on what should be there instead of that?
But is it broad enough? Because isn't the intent that it is in fact kind of an after the fact ability? Let's say an aunt who is estranged from her niece decides to strike up a conversation. That's going to be a really hard one for us to litigate in the policy, but it's going to be a very easy one for the principal to go, that student is uncomfortable, you do not have approval any longer. And that, that person goes. I almost wonder if the broadness of that is kind of the intent, because if we really do get into how can I talk to my neighbor who is, a boy, a girl, this age, that age, what are the circumstances? I wonder whether we're going to be getting into a morass of detail.
I'm okay as long as there's some kind of an appeal process, right? If someone were to take action against me because one of my kids' friends ran up and started talking to me, you might be able to ban me from the school for some period of time, but at some point I should have some recourse,
Okay,
I just don't like the language of no visitor may confer. I think giving the principal the ability to challenge somebody, say, hey, I need you to ask you to leave, or I need you to ask you to stop talking to any of our students, and give them that ability on the immediacy of that. But just to have a blanket, like to John's point, I mean, I've not walked into the school where I don't know a bunch of kids and they say hi to you.
And they're there for the primary intent of meeting with a particular student, which they told the principal about, right? If they wind up hanging out there for 4 hours, right? After that student is gone, the principal should have the right, or whoever the authority is should have the right to say enough's enough, right?
Can I make a suggestion then?
Yeah.
Sure.
So if we strike that and then we add a number 3 to the previous section, right now the previous section says all staff members shall be responsible for assuring that each visitor, 1, has a visitor's pass, 2, has registered at the school office and received authorization to be present for the purpose of conducting business, and then 3, I don't know the exact wording, but is limiting interactions with students to the authorized activities. Something like that. Rich, would that be clear enough?
That'd be the same thing though, is then my neighbor walks up and says, hi, that's not the reason I'm at the school and I'm violating the policy. But clearly I shouldn't be kicked out just for doing that. And also that's not kind of where, I mean, that was intended for.
Well, but it's a lot less litigious
Right.
in just putting it to say that the staff member shall be responsible rather than making it that they have to go to the principal in order to say hi to a neighbor.
I mean, honestly, I don't read it, and I think the policy, in practice, that's not how it is read, that you have to go get permission in advance. My concern about putting on the staff member is, now every staff member is equally empowered to tell us we can't talk to somebody based on what they think. And I think the building principal is the person who has the ultimate authority, barring, Dr. Lloyd walking into the building to make this decision. And it seems, I think, this, we may be talking around a particular situation, but if we can get it into some means where if somebody feels they have been mistreated under the policy, there is a remedy. This has not been a rampant issue that's come up where, we're not allowed to talk to kids, and kids are, people are freaking out about it. So that's a section of the policy that in reality, I'm not sure needs to be touched. And it seems like by doing it, by putting under all staff members, it's now broadened the responsibility in a huge way. So suddenly every REA member, every Teamster is now responsible under this for ensuring that nothing bad happens to a kid in a very broad-based way. And while we want to protect the kids, I think that starts getting so incredibly broad that we probably actually—
So you're in favor of leaving no visitor may confer with?
Without approval of the principal, because I think that's the important thing. The principals, has the authority to have it cease, but it doesn't say that prior approval. The word prior isn't in there. I think that's the kind of the point.
Can I ask a question about this real quick? I know I'm not on this committee, but so if the visitors in the school, they're not always with the principal, correct? But they're with some sort of staff member who's with them, right? And if that's the case, couldn't we just say, no visitor may confer with a student without the approval of their escort or whatever? And that way, if a student came up to someone and said hi, then whoever's with that person could deem that's fine. Or if it wasn't fine, they could say this isn't fine if there's anything inappropriate about it, right? Visitors aren't wandering around the school unattended.
You may go from point A to point B. You get your tag, you walk to where the meeting is.
No one escorts me to, a meeting with my child's advisor. I just go there.
Right.
So, no, yeah, so.
I think that the intent of this sentence really has to do with visitors interfering with teaching and learning. I don't believe that the intent was for those kinds of casual conversations you have when you see visitors see students they know. I think that this has more to do with visitors interrupting instruction than it has to do with those casual conversations. Because it does happen where visitors come into schools and they interrupt teachers to talk to students. So I really think that's what the intent of that line is about.
So then can we just change this to be no visitors may interrupt education?
the learning of a student.
There.
But do we need to, I mean, I question whether this is seeking a problem, because there may be some specific circumstances where there is a difference of opinion of whether somebody was reasonably dealt with. If there is a means of addressing that difference of opinion, that's the way to do it. But to change the policy, I mean, if we torture this wording, it all, I mean, it fundamentally doesn't matter, because they're just gonna, I wasn't interrupting, okay.
But the visitor registered and received authorization to be present for the purpose of conducting business. If they're not conducting that business in the school, right? If they're not, primarily conducting that business, they should be asked to leave. I mean, that's why you registered for visitation, right? Again, it's, under that language, can somebody run up to me and say, hey, Mr. Deal, and I'm out? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to avoid,
Yeah.
right?
And that's why I thought linking it to having registered and just saying, that they're doing things that are appropriate to their registered activity. I don't know. I guess.
It's not
I'll
a bad
just
idea.
share, honestly, I had no idea that's what that sentence meant until you clarified, Dr. Lloyd. So I would have read it and interpreted it as it was being interpreted by others. I can't have my kids' friends come up and say hi to me, but I would not have ever gone to, if that was the intention, interrupting education and learning. So it might be worth, if that's needed and that's something that happens and that we want that in policy, it might be worth editing for that reason alone.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
We just can't figure out what to edit it to.
Yeah, right. Well,
I think you were close, Jen. I think you were close with like, hey, we recognize visitors, come to the school with purposes, as long as they're within their purposes and conducting themselves, appropriately, they're allowed to do that. But then the principal at any time can ask them to leave if they're no longer there for that purpose. I just feel like, to John's point, listen, we know that there's some situations that happen. We know that it's just right for that selective interpretation. We should just clean it up. I'm sort of satisfied if there's an appeal process, that it doesn't go on forever kind of thing, but it'd be nice to clarify that slightly so it's less broad. So the intent is more clear.
right.
Dr. Marquis, can you give us guidance then for the next meeting?
Yeah, so for the next meeting, I'll, as I said, I'll look at a couple of the protocols. I'll look at that language specifically, trying to add in the interruption of learning, make that work well, instead of the other one, and then add the complaint policy. So I'll try to come up with some language options for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Section 5, PSBA policy changes. 5.01, attendance at board meetings via speakerphone. I think this policy was
Sticks together.
I think the
We're on
major
violation.
I think the major reason we looked at this one is because we added stuff about emergencies, or they did. Is that correct?
Yeah, PSBA came out with some changes. You were in compliance previously based on a few of the, changing the mode based on emergencies, but they added a lot of language to this based on the current situation statewide. So all the edits are in there, and that's directly from the PSBA.
Okay,
I like it, so unless there's any discussion, I would suggest.
I'm sorry to do. So we have something in here that is just our choice to restrict and not actually required. So this applies to regular board meetings and committee of the whole meetings only. Why may we not participate in a regular committee meeting electronically? We just did it to block people out, it seems like, at some point. So I would ask if anybody minds if we simply say this applies to all meetings.
That's good to me.
Hold on, where are you looking, Carl? I'm sorry.
Page 1, last sentence in the second paragraph under authority. This applies to regular board meetings and committee of the whole meetings only. So I'm reading that as we may not attend committee meetings virtually. And I think I've actually been told that in the past. And if we simply strip that out and said, this brave new world allows us to do this more effectively for any meeting.
Yes, and I also, and not for tonight probably, but I do believe that this should be a policy that we review. One of the things that I think the country is currently reviewing is the things that we're learning now. How does it change what we do on the other side of this crisis? I personally believe that given the flexibility to attend electronically, not every meeting, there obviously has to be some limitations. I think it allows the community to improve representation on our board that would allow people who otherwise may be precluded from committing the every Monday night, especially with 8 committees and everything else, to be able to engage more. So I would recommend at a future L&P meeting that we take a look at this policy for virtual attendance of board meetings and committee meetings moving forward, not just under emergency situations, if we're permitted to.
I'm with John on this because I was going to say the same thing. I like the Zoom meetings and electronic, and I see no reason why someone cannot, as long as they're able to be heard and seen. And also the public, you know, we can be in person and also have a Zoom, you know, meeting out to folks so they don't physically have to come to the school and can participate. So I think this policy should be reviewed to the least restrictive electronic legally allowed. So whatever, you know, unless there's a law that says we can't do X, Y, or Z, I would say if a board member is able to participate via Zoom or electronic means, that should be in the policy. Unless there's a law that says otherwise, I don't find any problem with someone participating the way we are right now. And I certainly don't find the public participation, both in person and this way, I think is good as well. So I think we should open it wide open.
Well, it sounds to me like you would be in favor of striking the entire second paragraph under guidelines on page 1 of 2. Because that's the part that restricts it to majority of school directors must be physically present. No more than 2 members may use this procedures at any meeting, and no individual may use it for more than 2 meetings.
That may be some legal mandate. We should probably ask Brian.
Right.
So we need to find out which of those is legally mandated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to
keep whatever
discuss as a board whether we think there's some minimum requirement that we think is respectable and needed, right?
Right.
So we may have purposes why we do want to mandate a certain number of meetings be in person, but I think that should be a board decision provided it's legally permitted.
Yeah, right now the board president in the first paragraph can terminate a school director's attendance through electronic communications, but then that leaves that open to abuse. If we don't have some
doesn't
other,
like me, cut off my Zoom.
That has happened in the past.
There is an eject function, I think, somewhere.
Yeah, and we do have, I mean, we've always had because I mean, it says emergency, but then necessary business out of town has been a reason to be able to do that. We've just limited the number of them. So I mean, maybe we consider.
Baby, that was one, right?
Yeah, having a baby, that was, so.
Do we need a reason? Can't we just say, hey, you get 3 mulligans or 4 mulligans, and for whatever reason you want to join electronically, you can. Why do you have
It says that 2 meetings per year.
You get 2 mulligans right now.
yeah, but 2 is a little limiting.
Yeah.
Well, those are
But
just
that might be
regular
the
business meetings.
Yeah, that's 2 out of 12.
2 out of 12 regular business meetings. All the rest,
Okay.
actually no mandate for any of us ever to show up. So,
Well, can we,
our
let's ask
responsibility-
Brian. So the action item is, let's ask Brian Subers to tell us what is the legal restrictions.
Yeah.
And that's a jumping off point for a
Yeah.
future board discussion.
That's what I said. Let's revisit it then.
And we suspended this policy at the beginning of the pandemic anyway. So right now it doesn't.
But I just have a question of clarity, for clarification. You may want to have an option without an emergency to have a Zoom meeting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, what if it was a local emergency that wasn't county, state, or federal?
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make
Like
sure.
huge
what I was,
accident on Route 100. Nobody can get through the intersection at 23 and 100.
We're just.
It happens at noon, but we don't think our meeting's going to happen that night. I don't know.
No, it's no problem. I just wanted to clarify, and I'll have the attorney, the lawyer, look at that, and then we'll also we'll consult with the PSBA on those changes as well.
Yeah, so it's not only an entire meeting, Rich, but it's also is their mandate on individual attendance at these meetings outside of what the board mandates itself.
Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
All right. The PSBA also made a bunch of recommendations regarding changing tobacco use to vaping products, also including vaping products. So policies 222, 323, 423, 523, and 904 are pretty similar.
So are we recommending these be forwarded to the board then, John? Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Yeah, I move that those that you just read be forwarded to the board.
I have some disagreements in there. I think we need to discuss more.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So they added a lot of stuff in here that doesn't exist in other school districts' policies. And as I understand it, there is now a state law that makes it illegal for anybody under the age of 21 to purchase tobacco products. So some of this stuff seems to me like it's covered by the state. I am completely behind adding the right wording to completely cover our e-cigarettes and vaping. But I'm not feeling solid on all the stuff that they changed in order to do that yet.
Specifics.
So, well, one specific is I don't know why they call out the name Juul, because as I understand that, that's like saying, you know, you shouldn't have a Kleenex or a tissue. Can't you just cover it with the generic name? Does anybody know?
Yeah, it's like a Q-tip. You know, it's a cotton swab, but it's e-cigarette or Juul to describe it. Is it hurt the policy to have it in there, or it's a more descriptive?
Yeah, I don't see how that detracts from it.
It'll date it quickly.
Yeah, at some point we're going to have to take that wording out.
Were these PSBA recommendations or
Yeah,
all the
that's
green
my
things
exact
PSBAs?
question.
Yeah.
Is it 100% PSBA? No editorializing from us?
No, we just submitted what the PSBA recommended to us.
Can I ask it probably a newbie question? What's the difference between 222, 323, 423, and 523? They're all the same.
Different populations.
Different employee groups.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And students.
And I think we need to look very carefully at the medical marijuana things. To Carl's point, there is a paragraph in here. I'm looking at 222 on page 2 under authority, third paragraph. The board prohibits student possession of any form of medical marijuana at any time in a school building, on school buses or other vehicles that are owned, leased, or controlled, on property, or at school-sponsored activities. That's a lot of restrictions to where you can use your medical marijuana. Like
that actually,
not at all.
That is very much in line with school code, is my understanding. Because actually, when you get it, because of the weird legal status of that, I believe the nurses can't distribute. You actually have to have a parent or legal guardian bring it in, administer to the child with it. So I think that may be one where we would want to confer with Brian as well, because I think we have to have the language that way, which is why it's in.
That's currently the recommended procedures for medical marijuana for a student, that the parent would come onto the campus and administer it to the student. And they wouldn't be allowed to be they're not allowed to be in possession of any other prescription medication as it is now, or anything else, you know, that would be prescribed to them has to be kept in the nurse's office. But that is currently the guidance for medical marijuana for students. I'm sure that will be changing as well, but that's currently it.
But I would accept this then. I mean, I don't see an issue.
Yeah, I would agree to that too.
I think it's also anticipated, and looking at some of the descriptions for the PSBA, that they do expect this to change in another year.
Yeah.
As the law changes.
The law changes, whatever new comes up, whatever is coming into the schools. Also, any kind of changes with the procedures for the medical marijuana, as you mentioned. They're expecting things to change over the next couple of years. So I would imagine that next year, this will probably be revisited with different wording. And then,
I would imagine that they vetted it legally pretty extensively, especially in terms of limiting the access to these things where, you know, otherwise liability could be created. So I'm guessing that they did their homework.
And we actually reviewed this in 2019 and had updated the language then. And actually now that I remember it's 2019, we did have legal look at it. It's worth, things have changed, so it's probably worth looking at it. But one of the things I know that we changed that reminded me was the law enforcement incident report. All the places where it refers basically arresting students and doing police reports used to be will, and we changed them all to may. So that if we had, you know, a special needs student who did not necessarily know what the student was doing in the same way that somebody who you know, might not, wasn't automatically being handcuffed and thrown out if there's separation. So I do recall that we put, which does not.
So with regards to that, Carl, I went and reviewed a couple other districts' policies, and instead of designating, now of course, sale of tobacco and vaping products needed to be reported to law enforcement, but they left it much more vague for use or possession, where they just said at minimum in-school disciplinary action or a fine. We don't have any fining in our policy, but that was their approach, that they said
Jennifer,
at minimum.
Do we know if those districts would have already considered this PSBA language, or is it something we're all considering at the same time?
Yeah, this just came out pretty
I was
recently.
not completely clear on that. The person that I was talking to was under the impression that they had adopted it recently, but he didn't give me a specific date.
this is from the most recent PSBA update. Now, we haven't had a meeting since January, so I couldn't tell you if it was last month or the month before, but they did just present this. So it's within a few, like 4 months. So districts are probably meeting to update it. If it came out in January at the least, and the board meetings, it would have taken to a policy meeting and then 2 readings. So some may not be updated, some may be. It's hard to say. This is the recommendation.
Can I ask Dr. Lloyd, just, I mean, obviously vaping's the real concern. And my concern is if we don't act, you know, we just leave this open, is it your recommendation? Because I feel like things like Juul and language, we can hit a year from now and clean that up. I'd rather put a policy in place that gets rid of vaping or lets us, if we feel this is good policy. Having reviewed this, Dr. Lloyd, discipline something that you're going to have to enact. What's your recommendation on the vaping situation, and does this give you the tool set you need to deal with vaping?
I think that this really is more in line with what we're already doing, and that's the PSBA's finally caught up with what we've been doing, and so we all know that this is a problem, and I appreciate that we would have a policy that's closer to that. So.
Okay, good enough for me.
Okay.
Yes, so I would recommend folks, just my 2 cents would be to accept the changes, and maybe just instead of, you know, putting it on a 3-year review, just review it next, you know, a year from now. That allows you to kind of, because this is evolving stuff with the marijuana laws and with vaping. Let's just accept I make a motion, we accept these and review it in a year.
Okay, second.
Okay.
The only thing that was different under 5 was 5.06. So they gave us some recommendations for policy 626. Dr. Marchini, could you just give me a review of what their recommendations are?
I'm going to have to ask Mrs. Crumrine to talk on this, the federal fiscal compliance.
Okay. Ms. Crumrine.
Laura. These are changes. Everything in green is from PSBA, and they're updating the language from control. So they just added segregation of duties, which is a very important thing. And then employees for time and reporting. Just that if there is an emergency and we're directed to pay employees, that we follow those guidelines. So this, everything here is, those are the two major changes, and everything is recommended by PSBA.
When you say guidelines, is that the same thing as law, or is that a recommendation? Are we, advocating our authority in terms of, helping taxpayers be being responsible for the dollars that O&J spends, and we get a recommendation coming from PSBA that's not state law, or is this actually the law says we have to pay it?
From what I understand, it says that if they're paid, it's particularly addressing employees paid with federal funds, and it should include payment for extenuating or emergency conditions in accordance with applicable law, regulation, or emergency declarations by state or federal authorities. So I think to me, it seems pretty restrictive that we're just not going to be making those judgments.
Well, the thing that concerns is not law, doesn't regulation, emergency declaration. We're under an emergency declaration now, correct? COVID-19, and we shut our school down.
Right.
Is this require us to pay every? What is this? What is the implication of that?
If it says, to me, it looks like if, as directed by these declarations, we're to do what the declarations say. That's how I read it. I don't know if anybody.
And so currently we have employees that are paid with Title I funds, and so they're being paid, and this is just really putting in the policy what we're doing, which is to pay them. I don't even know that we actually thought that we wouldn't pay, given that the governor said we're paying all employees. It didn't occur to us that we wouldn't pay the ones that are being paid with federal dollars.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just understanding. I just want to understand the handcuffs of this. If it restricts us, like for making, when we talk about furloughing stuff or when we're doing things, if this is restrictive outside of law, and if we're just, I just had that just jumped out at me as language was unclear.
I don't know. I read it as pretty clear. Federal funds, applicable law, regs, or emergency declarations by state or federal. I don't know. It seems pretty clear to me.
And I think so what Dr. Lloyd just said, we would do it anyway because we like to be in line with applicable law, regulations, or emergency declarations.
All right, fair enough.
A motion.
Yeah, I move we accept it as recommended.
Second.
Okay. Great. Next we go to regulation changes. And a lot of these regulation changes go back to changing the title of guidance counselor to school counselor. Do we just acknowledge these? Is that correct?
John, did we skip 904?
904.
That's part of the vaping conversation.
No,
Yes.
5 points, public attendance at school events.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did skip it.
904 carries with it the vaping
that was
tobacco use at public events.
Oh, that is just part,
That's all there was? Okay.
I apologize, yeah.
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 That's okay. So the regulation changes, are we just acknowledging these? Is that what I forget what regulation were versus policy.
Yeah, it would be that you would acknowledge them and we could make some adjustments. All the policies with the exception of Reg 328B, 328C, and 626 are revised for guidance counselors.
Okay. So these are just name changes. So anybody have any discussion about not doing that? These seem pretty straightforward to me.
Yeah, if that's all it is for me, I have no concerns.
Yeah, move that we move those through.
Okay. And then the other one is Regulation 62 6B, which is again a name change, changing limited English proficiency to English learners. Anybody have any objections to that?
No.
Okay, great. Then we have just one item on the 3-year policy review, which is Regulation 707B, resident use of track facility. And if I recall, Paul had wanted to go to the track a lot, so this is maybe he is.
It's aspirational. This is a policy that's annoyed me for a long time. That I can go to 5 other tracks in the area for other school districts, and I don't have to go in and get a form. I think as taxpayers, if we have an open track, they should be able to go use it on the times that we're about. And we shouldn't make them go through extra hoops to go do that. My 2 cents.
What is that noise?
Sorry, I have violin going. Hold on.
I was going to guess who that one was. Our time's up, John.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we're not actually collecting and tracking these forms from people who use the track as a de facto thing, are we?
Yes.
We are.
Yeah, the front desk at the administration building takes care of that.
But like if somebody's on the track, are you going to walk up to them and say, hey, where's your form?
No.
Can I make a motion? We just get rid of the need for the form.
So what do we need to modify in here?
Why do we have
Yeah.
it?
So
Yeah, what was the purpose of the form?
Anybody?
Do we do it for other things like tennis
Jackie,
courts or?
Jackie, you're the historian on
Want me to
this.
give you the history on this one?
go for it.
You feel it that there.
Gosh, this goes way back to when the turf fields were originally installed 2 times ago. And there was worry at the time about being damaged. Eventually, we did turn to an operational procedure that did not include forms. And we had a very easy way of having the track give access to the community. It's similar to what we're doing right now as a school district, because we're not in session. And you can really lock the man gates off so that individuals can go through there, have access to the track without bringing in vehicles that would damage turf. So we do have an easy way to manage that. The policy, we reinstituted the policy because we had complaints. I'll be just quite frank. We had complaints by a resident that we weren't following our policies. This is a while ago. So it could definitely stand some updating.
Would you go with Paul's recommendation?
Removal of the forms?
Yes.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that if Dr. Lloyd is comfortable with that.
I think, Mrs. Crumrine, that how many weeks have you been doing this?
Yeah.
Shows that our community is respectful of our facilities.
Right, absolutely.
So you'd want to strike 4 and 5 and
4 and 5, definitely.
And then 7 refers to a pass, so we
Right.
need to
We don't
eliminate
need
or
that.
modify that.
Yeah, I don't know that we would even need to have a pass if we are opening the gate during non-school hours and restricting access to only humans and not, other things like bikes or motorized vehicles. So I don't
Yeah,
think we would need
I would just strike all the past references.
pass forms.
4, 5, and 7.
Yeah. Right, because number
Do we
6
enforce number 6?
Number 6, let me see.
Good question.
No, we do not, because they're accompanied by an adult. We don't have children that come to the track that aren't accompanied by adults.
But do we want to maintain, yeah, if it doesn't matter, that doesn't matter. But I just didn't know if 13-year-olds are wandering over from across the street to run the track, Do we ever kick them out because they're 13?
Yeah, they're middle schoolers.
If they're
or-
running, good
or
for
freshmen.
them.
So none of the freshmen can use the track. Only the. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, we can change that form, and we could bring that back for review if you'd like. Make sure everybody's clear.
I'd make a motion, we strike those, Rich, if you could bring that back, if everybody's okay with it.
Good with
Yeah.
that.
Works for me.
Okay. Yeah, we'll change regulation with the resident use of track facilities, striking 4, 5, and 7, and making sure we clean up the language. And we'll bring it back in June, if that's okay.
That's great. Okay. Public comment. Paul, are you there? You still there with us?
Oh, I'm here.
Do we have anybody who wants to talk?
So again, I'll stress to the people that are watching in the public, if you want to make a comment, please press the participant button, and then press raise hand.
And please give us your name and your township. Caller 1.
We are
We have
still
one.
waiting, and I see
We have one.
We have one.
one. All right.
I don't know. Wait, am I? Yep. There
Mrs. McCreary, you
Yep.
are on.
Yep. I would just like to speak to the conversation about the taking the committees down. Over the years, when I first got on the board and as a member of the public before that, it was frustrating when there was a topic and yet there was no committee to come to. So in particular, for the extracurricular committee, when that was put back up and we finally got it going last year with some goals, a couple of topics that were important in the public were number 1, cheerleading, and also another one near and dear to my heart is band, because I know, for example, there is, when you don't have a meeting or meet ever, there's no time when a member of the public can come and actually talk to something and present it. So for example, with band, I had a band person ask me the other day, are they getting their uniforms? And you guys had on your board meeting last week that the rest of the payment for the band uniforms was being moved to the following fiscal year. So if you're a member out in the public that want to come and talk, and again, another band comment where there was for a long period of time, and I don't have a child in the band now, but a lot of the children want to actually go back to competitions. So these are questions, and that when you have the committee and you take it away, there's no venue for the members of the public to come ask those questions. So I would consider that before you go and take the committee and the meeting dates off the rotation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another one. It's Claire Hampton.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Go ahead, Claire. Yes.
My name's Claire Hampton. I'm in East Coventry. I'd just like to know where the school district's lawyer is during this L&P committee. We've had multiple questions tonight from the board members about certain wording, and is this legal? Are we allowed to do this? I'd just like to know why, when we've discussed how attendance can be raised during online meetings, where our lawyer is during this current meeting. That's all I have.
Okay,
So
thank you.
our board member, our solicitor represents numerous other school districts, and he is only able to attend our school board meeting on our regular school board night. So he's with another district right now.
And I'd also offer the observation that in my experience, most of these questions require more than just an off the top of somebody's head response. And we tend to get fairly detailed answers to our questions. So simply having a person in the room wouldn't actually add value, because he'd have to go back, or he or she would have to go back and further research things.
Fair enough. Anyone else?
That seems to be it.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for your patience, both committee members and other board members and admin, and thank you public for viewing. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thanks. Good night.
Night, everybody.
Everybody.
Catching up.
Thanks.